We're here on the purple couch. So I'm Perel, and my pronouns are they, them. And I am a small, white, disabled, queer Ashkenazi Jew. I'm wearing a black dress, and I'm curled up on a couch, and I have my cane with me, which is black and chrome, and my cane's name is Child.
I'm Kenny Fries, and I am also I'm a short white man with short dark hair with wire-rimmed glasses, and today I'm wearing a purple shirt that doesn't quite clash with the couch, and like black jeans which are now faded, so they probably look great here. My cane's in the other room because if I had it here, it would fall and make noise and disrupt everything.
So life unworthy of life. Let's talk about that, Kenny.
Life unworthy of life was the category of people, disabled people that were deemed not worthy of life during the Third Reich by the Nazis. And for the show, Perel appropriated it in a way by putting the "un" in parentheses.
And so when we both actually came to Berlin on our own and we met here, neither of us knew about the history of what happened to disabled people during World War II. That came later for us, and peripherally, perhaps for each of us, we found the history.
I happened to be here in 2013, and there was a big, huge exhibit called Diversity Destroyed. And going to the larger exhibit, I started to find little pieces of this disabled history. I would go to some place where I was totally not expecting to encounter this. I went to the City Hall in Hamburg just to get a tour, and I saw this exhibit, and it was about an institution outside of Hamburg that I went backwards in time. The history during the 30s and even in the 1920s was just a miserable history for disabled people. So I really stumbled over this history.
And for me, I actually, growing up Jewish, I always learned so much more about the history of the Holocaust, and it wasn't until I was working with disabled performers in Europe, and I was talking to Claire Cunningham, and she said, "Oh, you need to go visit Hartheim." And I said, "Hartheim, what's that?" And then it turned out to be a castle outside of Linz, Austria, which was one of the 6 sites of the Aktion T4 program. And so I feel like it changed me, and I feel like now I'm residing in that change. And I'd say that there's a visceral feeling of going to these places for me where my disabled body in its presence can connect to all of the bodies of disabled people who resided in these places and whose absences are part of that. There's also something to me about the use of narrative in these memorials, because it's always so much more about the doctors and the nurses and their ways of life and their names. And it's not at all about the identities of the people who were killed, what their livelihoods were, or anything about them, except for the awful ways that they were experimented on and what they had to endure. What I have desired in all of us being together is to be able to reach back through history and like bring everyone into the room with us, and then to also for us to be able to talk to each other about what it means to share an identity whose history you actually you're not even allowed to know or access. Did anyone in the audience know about T4?
My name is Sabrina Jammal-Eddine. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a brown Arab cisgender woman with dark brown hair, and I'm wearing a bun on the top of my head and round glasses. Yeah, I was just gonna say real quick, and it kind of affirms what you all were saying when you introduced T4, is that like I've seen memes where they like shortly discuss that like gay and disabled people were also killed during the Holocaust, but I never got any like formal education on T4, or it's like it didn't make the cut during Holocaust discussions.
I'm an older white redhead with, and I use the pronoun she and her. I'm wearing a yellow top and have my little AirPods in my ear so I can hear you all, because besides having a physical disability, I'm also hard of hearing. I am a survivor of the Holocaust, but I was born at the end of 1939, and I was not born with a disability. But in doing a lot of extensive reading about the Holocaust, I came across the Aktion T4 program. And in thinking about it, here I was, an infant living in Berlin, and then being hidden on a farm outside of Berlin, Jewish, and later as an adult having acquired a disability, I sort of thought to myself, wow, it's a double whammy. So I could have been killed because I'm a Jew, and I could have been killed because I have a disability. And one of the things that struck me so poignantly and has stayed with me is the complicity of the entire German medical profession, or almost entire German medical profession, that bought into this eugenics program, which certainly predated Hitler, the rise of Hitler and the Second World War. But here's a profession that is supposed to be saving people, and instead was destroying people's lives because they considered that these lives were lives unworthy of life.
I took the master's program at UIC, and we did study eugenics and also T4. And I have to admit that I went back to it this week because in preparation for today. Oh, I forgot to describe myself. I'm sorry. I'm white. My hair is reddish brown, and I'm wearing navy blue. And my pronouns are she and her. But yes, we did study it, but then I went back and looked up some of the things, and it was just like a wave of just unbelief came over me.
This is Dean, and I am a white transgender male with short brown hair, glasses, I have a little beard. And I'm wearing a blue shirt. And I first heard about T4 through disability studies and working on my PhD actually, and that's really sad that it took that long for me to learn about T4, and especially as an educator. I was a high school teacher and with a special ed degree. And I identify as someone who has a disability, but didn't really see that disability as a source of pride or anything, but I was really wanting to empower my students. But being someone who has a disability and a special ed teacher and not knowing about this history till I get into my PhD is very problematic. And it's something that has really motivated me to teach all my pre-service teachers and any kind of ed courses and about this history, so that when, and often they're like in disbelief that they didn't know about this, and it's really connected them to understanding a history of special ed. And yeah, that's all I have to say, but it's really informed me as an educator.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Chris Griffin, Black, same gender loving man, pastor of St. Martin's on the west side of Chicago. Gray hair, as you could see. I'm just delighted to be here and take all of this information in. I was not aware of T4, so I'm being educated, delightfully so.
Hi, I'm Lily. I am a brown Latina with short, kind of brownish, dark brown hair, and it's kind of chin length, but wavy and puffy. So it's technically supposed to be to my shoulders, but it's not. Yeah, so I guess I heard about Aktion T4 maybe once I actually got way deeper towards the end of my undergraduate degree, and then my graduate degree. And I would say that part of that is because I've got more exposure to disability culture. And I often wonder whether I would even identify and think of myself as disabled in the way that I do because of my identities if I hadn't acquired higher education, if I hadn't learned certain things that I don't know where I would have come across it. So I guess to me, I like to think that really uncovering history of a shared identity is really spoken to me.
This is Sky Cubacub speaking, and I use they, them pronouns. I'm a small, half Filipinx, half actually German human who is non-binary. I have a pink scale mail headpiece, which is kind of like chainmail armor on my head. I'm wearing a crop top that I made that features one of my late father's paintings, along with lots of bright jewel tone colors. I went to a school called Alexander Graham Bell Elementary, and we had a deaf program, but it was a school that was founded by a eugenicist. But my 8th grade teacher who taught facing history in ourselves when I was in 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade, Mrs. Posnick, facing history and ourselves is like a lot about talking about the Holocaust and genocide, and just like trying to get it into students' heads to not be a bystander. So yeah, we talked very in depth about a lot of different things about the Holocaust, but also definitely they were talking a lot about disabled folks because of our school having a a disabled population and a deaf population.
My name is TJ Gordon, and I am a African American male, a large African American male with a short afro, and I'm also wearing a black shirt, and my pronoun is he, his. I found out about the T4 program through reading a couple of books about autism, and one of them called Neurotribes went very in depth about one of the medical professionals who discovered autism, Hans Asperger, and I think the person went in length in describing his notes on children and teenagers who would excel in many things like music and such, but has like a little time, has a lot of struggles with communication or whatnot. I find it interesting that not only he was describing some of the things that I eventually have, but also the fact that he was doing it in a time where he was basically a part of that same program meant to destroy people with disabilities and exterminate them. So by reading that book, I got this complex feeling of, oh, there's this amazing person who figure out what's going on with me along with somebody else in the United States. But he is also tied to a cruel, dark history, whether people want to admit it or not. So that's how I came into knowing T4, based on reading basically the history of my condition, autism.
We had both wanted to be able to talk about how being able to talk about this history relates to what we're experiencing now. And, this is what I would call the shadow of eugenics, what is occurring now.
When the pandemic began over a year ago, I was listening to what was going on back in the US, in the UK, and also, it wasn't so much in Germany at that time, but in Italy with triage protocols and the idea that elderly were expendable, disabled people were expendable. It was very frightening. And then I realized, there's a whole other layer to the work that I've been doing for 7 years. It's the view that the societies have about disabled people that is kind of the floor that all of these ableist and dangerous edifices are built. And I started to think about how even with the Nazis, it didn't start with the Nazis. Eugenics happened way before, decades before, and it wasn't a German thing. It was rampant in the US, it was rampant in Canada, it was rampant in the UK, and that it's still rampant, it's still there. And in 2016 in Sagamihara, Japan, 16 people in a group home or institution were killed by a former employee because he thought it would be best for Japan. So this is around for a long time. And when I look back the history of T4, I go back to 1923 and Dr. Ewald Meltzer and his survey of parents of disabled people. He asked how the parents would feel if their disabled children were killed. And to his surprise, 73% of the parents said that it would be fine for their disabled children to be killed if they didn't know about it. So the ground was laid way before the Nazis. What's happening now is not the same as what happened before. It echoes what happened before. And that it's still, there's still the floor of eugenics, not only with disabled people, but race and gender and class is still there. So when something like this happens, it can build upon this. And so my question has always been, how do we rid the world of of the floor and build a new floor?
I'm kind of family looking white woman. I'm wearing glasses that are pretty cool, hard to describe. I'm wearing earrings that say gladiolas, not cages on them. And I'm wearing a shirt that shows my, what are these?
Shoulders.
Shoulders, thank you. And I'm wearing a lipstick and I have gray and brown short hair. I grew up in Israel or Palestine, well, mandatory Palestine, historical Palestine that became Israel. And when I learned about the Holocaust, and I learned a lot about the Holocaust, and there's a lot of Holocaust education in Israel. And by a lot, I mean like a ton, like all year, every year since you're like in kindergarten. And disability wasn't really a part of that. And, you know, I think this is really relates, Kenny, to what you were saying, kind of the pushback to like the shadow of eugenics. It's more like, it's not even the afterlife of eugenics. I think it's the eugenics that's still here. I don't even know if it's new eugenics. It's kind of like the old eugenics and new clothes or something like that. So for example, the reason I think that I never learned about T4 until I came to the US, and I'm not even sure I learned about gay people being killed in the Holocaust, except for movies that I've seen on my own. I only learned about Jews dying in the Holocaust. And I think that that has to do a lot with like Zionist education that happens in Israel. And I think that that is completely related to how Israel was able to form as a state and how it's able now, for example, to not vaccinate Palestinians and not give vaccinations to Palestinians. And so those things to me, like I live always with the eugenics that is here, right? Like in the formation of the state of where I used to live, of where I came from. So to me, those two things are completely related. And so I guess to me is the floor is maybe, at least for me, has been to have a very specific like anti-imperialist stance, which is not about representation, it's about redistribution, it's about not just economically, but really of like power, right? Like of power relations of all kinds. And so I'm just giving that as one example of how, you know, eugenics is still here. I mean, I think vaccines is like a huge example of how this plays out.
My name is Jonathan, and I am a white man with red hair, blue eyes, and I'm wearing a dark shirt with buttons at the top. I wanted to comment about the pandemic and how it has had an impact on us, how it has impacted me, myself, as a deaf person, and what the floor looks like with that. When COVID-19 began, it really hit hard, and I felt like my whole life was just thrown off completely, especially because a large part of how I communicate is through reading lips, and my ability to understand people was taken away because of the masks that have been required. So I haven't had access to that, and even when I'm communicating via sign language, that issue of being further away than 6 feet has also come into play. So really, the idea of isolation and being forced to stay home, really, it's just, I've noticed that it has changed things, not only for myself, but also the impact that it's had on people with disabilities and specifically deaf individuals. For example, I had an emergency dental appointment and I'd let the dentist's office know, like, I'm deaf, they know who I am. I let them know everything. But when I got to that dentist appointment, the door had a sign that said, please call for entry. And I saw that and I was like, what the heck? It was another barrier that I had to overcome in order, so I had to knock on the door, knock on the glass, until somebody finally showed up and it was like, oh, oops, they didn't realize. They had forgotten what being deaf means. And unfortunately, it's not only hearing people who don't understand what deafness means, but it's also hearing disabled people who don't always recognize the uniqueness of being deaf during the pandemic. And we don't have the power of being able to verbally communicate in general. So that's kind of what it has looked like for me over the past year.
From a pandemic side, I still see traces of eugenics, especially as an African American with a disability. The form of eugenics I have seen is access to information, or access to what we need is hidden. And if there's information available, either you have to go to places outside of the area that you live in, or you have to understand it in a language that is not written for people with disability in general, especially if you're Black or Latinx, or a person of color with a disability, where some words you're not going to understand. You may not understand which vaccine is effective or how can you get the information. So because of lack of access to information, I feel like we at this lure with the pandemic, on top of the fact that we are stressed with the police violence and the deterioration of our communities and lots of other things. Even things that we normally rely on to distress is usually non-social distance. It has affected our mental health even more. So I think because of the lack of access to the things that we enjoy as disabled people of color, and the lack of accessible information about COVID or how to get the vaccine or how to get treated, we feel like we're at the bottom.
In my vision of, like, if there was a new floor, that we would also be able to just like, I don't know, be as useless and worthless as possible and just be like tired and lazy and bitchy and like just also all of the things that we're never actually allowed to be, even if we feel them, because we don't want to bring the wrong kind of attention to us to not have to worry about that
Or angry.
anymore.
Or angry.
Oh, and super angry. Yeah. And aggressively, any of those things.
Hi, my name is Matt Bodett. I am a white male with short, dark brown hair and a closely trimmed beard, which is peppered with white, some age. I do have blue eyes and a button-up blue shirt with some white flowers on it. And one of the great questions I think that Kenny had asked was, when we build this floor, what are some of the things that you want to get rid of as well? And for me, one of the great the most problematic at times for me is the necessity to justify our importance before we speak. It seems like there's always a prerequisite to being included culturally, that first we must define our importance and why we need to be included in discussions. And for me, when we rebuild that floor, that needs to be gone. And as a mad artist and being given the diagnosis of schizophrenia, I spend so much time trying to tell people why stigma needs to be torn down before I even get to talk about the real deeper qualities of my own work. And so I feel like our conversations are so much tied to this T4 notion that we are valuable. We're inherently valuable as humans with experiences and ideas, but we have to justify that too often. And in justifying, we take up so much time that we don't get to some of the deeper kind of meat of our experiences and our knowledge and the things that we can contribute to society.
It's wonderful to be with a group of people where we have a shared commonality in terms of disability. And I'm so tired of our always having to explain ourselves and justify ourselves to the world. As an artist, as a dancer with a disability, I have to prove to the world that I'm worthy. As an older Jewish woman, I have to prove that it's okay. We as disabled people are always having to prove ourselves that we are worthy of life. And so it is, I think, critically important that we applaud each other and applaud ourselves. So I think that if we can share these experiences with each other and support each other, it goes a long way into acknowledging our humanity and our right to be here and be lazy and tired, or not have to be constantly productive and not having to constantly prove who we are and that we are worthy of life.